I'm gonna hide this tape when I'm finished. If none of us make it, at least there'll be some kind of a record. The storm's been hitting us pretty hard now for 48 hours. We still have nothing to go on. One other thing. I think it rips through your clothes when it takes you over. Windows found some shredded long johns, but the name tag was missing. They could be anybody's. We're all very tired. There's nothing else I can do. Just wait. R.J. McCready, helicopter pilot, U.S. Outpost North 31.
The Thing is a horror-themed third-person shooter developed by Computer Artworks and released in 2002 for the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and PC. Licensed movie tie-in games were once common. They usually released around the same time as the movie and had a similar story. But this game was different. It's a direct sequel to the 1982 John Carpenter film of the same name, which is in turn based on the 1938 short story by John W. Campbell entitled Who Goes There?, which is in turn based on the hit 2018 game Among Us. I actually watched the movie for the first time to make this video, so I can now tell you that it is a solid 9 out of 10. Nice effects, doesn't really give you enough time before shit hits the fan to care about the characters. Personally, I identify a lot with The Thing. I too hide in the dark corners of YouTube, searching for other creators to absorb and imitate. Right now, I'm a terrifying amorphous mass of teeth and dick jokes, but given time, I will become a near perfect facsimile of a much better YouTuber. I also don't like being on fire. Through different versions and many retellings of the story, the core is generally the same. A team of scientists in a remote location that is very cold, that's important, discover a frozen alien life form that can take on the appearance and memories of anyone that it consumes. Distrust and paranoia over who is and isn't human pits everyone against each other. The humans have to figure out who's an imposter, while the alien continues to opportunistically kill off the survivors. Spoilers incoming for a now 40-plus-year-old movie, but it is relevant. A Norwegian research team in Antarctica accidentally unleashes a shape-shifting and extremely hostile alien. After the Norwegian base is destroyed, it escapes to a nearby American base in the form of a husky, and starts killing them too. After fighting the alien and learning that they can tell who is and isn't an imposter with a blood sample, the remaining humans blow up their base and the monster. In the end, only McCready, played by Kurt Russell, and Childs, played by Keith David, are left. Neither knows if the other is a human, but they have no shelter and they're freezing to death anyway, so they decide it doesn't really matter. Fade to black and the credits roll. The film received a fairly negative reception on release, only making a little more in the box office than it cost to produce. But still, over time, it grew into a cult classic and later into widespread fame. Skip ahead and the story goes that in the year 2000, Universal Interactive went thumbing through the archives for a movie they could turn into a game. John Carpenter's The Thing was an easy pick due to its brand recognition and its ambiguous ending. Universal Interactive was the video games division of Universal Studios. They licensed out existing IP and acted as publisher to third-party developers. That's why Spyro and Crash Bandicoot have had multiple developers over the years. Appropriately, in a gross orgy of corporate cannibalism, Universal Interactive merged into Vivendi Games, which then merged with Activision to become Activision Blizzard. That mound of screaming flesh was then swallowed whole by the deepest of throats, Microsoft. Like I said though, Universal Interactive generally didn't make their own games. Computer Artworks were chosen as the developers for The Thing after reskinning a level of their previous game, Evolva, to be set in the Arctic with a boss fight against a thing creature. Leaning on the film's themes of fear and distrust, the game would feature a squad of NPC companions who would react dynamically to the environment and the player's actions. If your NPC followers spend enough time around the monsters or gore, they'll crack up, and yes, that's really the name of the status. If you can't calm them down fast enough, they'll go insane, sometimes even escaping the situation in other ways.
Oh, hell no!
If they lose faith that you're a human, they can refuse to follow orders or even attack you. Blood tests would allow the player to determine if a squad member had been infected or to prove that they were still human themselves. Alright, so now everyone's caught up, and if you already knew all of that, then I look forward to your corrections in the comments. The Thing begins with 2 teams of US Special Forces soldiers investigating the now destroyed US and Norwegian outposts from the movie. You play as Captain Blake, leader of Bravo Team. He was assigned to investigate the US outpost, and it's the tutorial level. You discover the ship that the alien had been building in the movie, the tape recorder that MacReady left behind, and the frozen corpse of Childs alone in a broken shack. Colonel Whitley, Blake's superior officer, orders him to destroy what's left of the US base with C4 and return to base. Blake instead chooses to go to the Norwegian base alone to back up Alpha Team. If you want to avoid story spoilers, now is as good a time as any to skip ahead. Timestamps are in the description. I know no one does that, but hey, maybe you clicked on a video about a game and didn't expect to hear about the game. I don't know your life. Arriving at the Norwegian base, Blake finds that Bravo Team was attacked and separated by a group of monsters. Unable to make radio contact with Whitley, Blake fights his way through the base, saving humans and killing things. Eventually, he discovers the entrance to a secret facility hidden beneath the base. This laboratory was operated by Gen Inc., which I can only assume is short for Generic Bad Guys Incorporated, because we don't learn much else about them. They were experimenting on things and developing chemical weapons with the research, like a Great Value Umbrella Corporation. The head of the lab is Dr. Sean Faraday, who is actually based on and I believe voiced by John Carpenter. We save him only to be greeted by our boss, Colonel Whitley, on the way out. It turns out Whitley was also working with Gen Inc. to experiment on things. He tranquilizes Blake, and when Faraday refuses to inject Whitley with the Thing virus, Whitley kills him. Apparently he was trying to use the virus to cure his cancer? Blake awakens locked up in the bottom of the lab, where it's revealed that his cells are somehow resistant to the Thing. He fights his way out, destroying the labs and killing wave after wave of Things and Black Ops soldiers. He destroys several planes that were set to spread Thing samples all across the world, and an underground armory full of Things and weapons. This is the part where the difficulty spiked and stuff became kinda miserable. It was just turret after turret and piles of army men. Once the armory self-destructs, you have to run through it backwards, but a lot of the damage in that section is unavoidable, and it's right after the third boss fight. I started it with no first aid kits, and it was kind of a soft lock. I had to load an earlier save and redo the last 2 levels just to get through it. It was frustrating, but at least I learned that you can push this guy into the door that triggers the third boss, and then snipe out the second Thing from his container so you don't have to deal with him during the fight. Finally, Blake catches up to Whitley, blowing up some convenient barrels to torch him, but Whitley just stands in the flames, immune to the one weakness the monsters had. Blake has to chase him again, and he catches up to him while he's waiting for a rescue helicopter on top of the alien ship that started all of this. We're able to get on board a helicopter just as Whitley erupts into a giant tentacle monster. The final boss is a turret sequence in a helicopter. You shoot the barrels and then the facehugger until it falls over. As they fly off into the sunset, Blake asks the pilot for his name and finds out that he's MacReady, the other survivor from the movie. Overall, it's a decent story, but it's kind of told like
you want him to do you so much you could do anything?
For the majority of its runtime, I had very little idea what I was meant to be doing or why. It was simple enough to just keep going in the direction of the enemies though. If you're not a fan of scary games, I am right there with you, but don't worry, there's really nothing scary about this game. It's a run and gun action shooter with a coat of horror paint. Think of those flood levels in the first Halo, but less tense and cool. I realize that probably sounds extremely negative, but I did just compare it to one of the most influential games ever made. While I do have some criticisms, I enjoyed my time with the Thing overall. The gunplay was loose and fun. It reminded me of the PS1 Siphon Filter or the Darkness games. I've always thought it was a shame that just about every shooter has leaned into precision aiming over the last few decades. Personally, I love being able to run and gun like an action hero. The shotgun especially felt good in a fight, and I usually found myself giving the submachine guns and all of their ammo to my teammates. Ammunition was plentiful, and until the end of the game, the surest way to win a fight was just to run directly into it. Another way the game leans on its cinema roots is that in the early levels, the camera will cut away from your character to show your next objective or whenever a monster is creeping up on you. I liked it. It made me feel like I was playing something more like a movie, but the game stops doing it after the first few levels. All of these cutaways, as well as the game's cutscenes, are rendered in Engine 2. Your NPC squadron can have 3 different classes, but overall they don't really matter. The game claims you can tell which class an NPC is by looking at their hat, but look at this guy. What do you think he is? You'll always be given an engineer if you need one. I couldn't honestly tell you the difference between a soldier and an engineer. I know they're supposed to be better in combat, but it wasn't noticeable to me. And the medics, if you have one, act as an unlimited automatic first aid kit outside of fights. But even without them, 90% of the combat is basically no threat. There are only a few types of monsters, and you handle them in 2 ways. Either you shoot them to death, or you shoot them to the edge of death and spray them with a flamethrower. The mechanic was novel at first, but the flamethrower has the range of a high 5, and if you're trying to chase a fleeing enemy with it, you'll just keep setting yourself on fire. I enjoyed the first half of the game more. That was the part that felt a little more tense and focused more on the monsters. After that, they're still around, but half the time they seem to be working with the enemy humans, and that really didn't make any sense to me. Though it could have just been weird AI, because in the next room they'd be fighting each other again. It was disappointing that the last half of the game is almost entirely against army dudes. They can spot you from any distance through a blizzard and kill you pretty quick. The difficulty spikes in the later game came almost exclusively from turrets and snipers. Aside from the bosses, you've seen everything monster in the first few levels anyway. Speaking of the bosses, there are only 4, including the final boss, and they're all just different versions of big thing in a small room that can't move. The first and third are bullet sponges full of gasoline. The second boss is a hot pile of garbage. I eventually resorted to peeking around a box and abusing its AI. The infection and trust systems are equally disappointing. When NPCs become infected, they'll transform immediately. Using save states, I was able to catch multiple times where I would run a blood test on someone and they would pass it, and then immediately after that they would turn into a monster. Almost every NPC in the game is scripted to transform at certain points regardless of if they were attacked or not. The rest get left behind between levels, so there's no time to get attached to them, no tension on whether or not they're infected, and no drama when they die. The trust system might as well not exist at all, because when you give someone a gun, they automatically trust you, and unless you stand around shooting them, that rarely changes. When they do transform, they'll drop whatever they had, so there's no reason not to give them everything you can spare. The team that created the game was aware of these problems, but as usual, it comes down to time and money. Thankfully, the game reviewed and sold well, and a sequel was started, but cancelled when Computer Artworks went out of business soon after. It's a shame because I actually agree with those Universal executives. I think the Thing license has amazing potential, and even the first game shows it. If I could have the same game, same story and gunplay, but the members of my team be permanent characters that I actually have to manage and interact with, it would have been fantastic. Give me a Thing series that's written like Gears of War and I'd play the shit out of it, but I guess after all this time trapped in the ice, it's fair to say that the Thing is finally dead. Haha, you thought, but the Thing rises again. It was announced in June of 2024 that Night Dive Studios would be remastering The Thing for modern hardware with an expected release in 2024. And wouldn't you feel silly if you only found out about that halfway through making a video reviewing the original? Yeah, you'd probably feel like a dumbass just making a video that wouldn't be relevant in a few months. Night Dive does good work, I have faith in them, but here's the thing. You could put the original game on digital stores for $10 or $15 running an emulator with save states and up-res textures, and it would be fine. Not great, but fine. If it were given a remaster just to update the graphics, it would be a difficult game to recommend at $30 or $40. Even though I had fun with it, the deeper issues that are keeping this game from being amazing are in its systems and in the way its story is told. But there have been some reports that Night Dive are expanding the trust and infection systems, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Either way, I'm glad this game is getting a second chance to rise from the ice. To all my subscribers and everyone who has seen my junk or my videos, you're all truly wonderful. Thanks for watching. Later.
My men are dying out there. I've seen firsthand what this infection is capable of.
Oh, you have no idea what it can do.